Hi, everyone. I think we're about to get started on the React lecture. So I'm Akshat. Just a few quick announcements before we start. Milestone 0 is due tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. Basically, you just have to form your team and then submit 10 different ideas. A little quirk on that is for our competition, one of our sponsors is MIT Open Learning, and they're giving a prize of like $500 to the best team that uses some sort of Canvas-like website idea. So I guess there'll be more details on Piazza, but that's something to look forward to if you have any class-related ideas. Yes, so what? It has to integrate with Canvas. So to get this prize, your website needs to be somehow integratable with Canvas. But yeah. And now on to React. So yes, so that's not the only sponsored prize. There might be other sponsored prizes, and we'll let you know tomorrow, either here or on Piazza or somewhere. But yeah, now on to the lecture. So I'm Akshat, and today I'll be teaching you guys about React with Alan. I don't know where Alan is, but we can get started without him. I guess it's fine. Oops. Let me move to the next slide. So to recap a little bit, what have we learned so far? We learned HTML. It's basically your website is a bunch of nested little boxes, and you have tags for each of them. You can put text, you can put your divs. We learned about CSS, which is how you style web pages. It's how you add color, how you add a border to things, how you change the font, how you make your site look nice. And then we learned about JavaScript today. JavaScript is how you actually do things. It's how you print out things. It's how you do functions. It's like, we have a little analogy on the top. There's a little pop-up. But this analogy is that HTML is kind of like the bones in your body because it's like the structure. It's the bare bones version of the website. And then on top of that, you have your skin, which is what makes you look nice. It like adds color. It makes you, like, imagine if you're just a skeleton. That'd be pretty not exciting. And then JavaScript is like the muscles. It's how you actually do stuff. It's the functionality behind everything. So hopefully that makes sense. That's what we've taught so far. So for now, what I'm going to do is I want to try to demo to you guys making a website using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if anyone has any ideas of something I can make, anyone in the audience, shout out a website. Yeah?
You should make Facebook.
Okay, fine. I'll make Facebook. I'll do it. Using just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we have Facebook. This is just a random website I found, and I'll get started. So let's go. Let's start. I got to do my div, my friends section. I'll type in the header, friends. I'll do like an A tag to get the link. I need to make a ton of posts. So I guess each post, I need a header, I need an image. I need to put the name, like Alan Ding, the date, the text, the post text. And then there's a ton of other posts too. There are probably hundreds of posts on this timeline. So I guess I have to make another div for each of them. So this code's gonna go on and on and on. Yeah, I don't think I can do this. I think this is gonna take way too long. Maybe we should do this another day. I don't think I can continue this lecture. Maybe another time. I think I'm done. Yeah, I give up. I'm not doing this anymore.
Akshat, wait. I got you. I'll help you out. You're ruining their minds, okay? And you're ruining my Facebook reputation, but that's fine. So all you have to do to code Facebook is this. Hold on. Boom. Facebook. Right? Pretty nice,
Wait.
right?
Wait a sec. You're telling me that I could have just used the Facebook tag and coded all of Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it says, and it looks like it's rendering fine.
Okay, wait a sec. I have a question.
Okay.
How does it know what to display when you type in this Facebook tag?
Well, I actually defined the Facebook, I basically defined it elsewhere. So as you can see, in Facebook.js, it's actually defined very simply as a div, which contains your nav bar and your friend section and your feed.
So what you're telling me is we can code Facebook by putting in a navbar tag, a friends tag, and a feed tag, and then it just makes a navbar, it makes a friend section, and then the feed section?
Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
But how does it know what to put for the navbar, and how does it know what to put for the friends? Those aren't real tags, right? Like,
yes, they are, and it does just that. I'm just kidding, no. So basically, I defined them elsewhere. So for example, in navbar.js, I have it defined as well as a div, and maybe it has the Facebook logo, as well as, for example, a search bar, and then also the profile picture, similarly for friends, right? Maybe you want to include images of who your friends are. I do have friends. And then we have feed, right, which will contain all the information about your posts.
wow.
And so what we use is called React. And basically, React is a JavaScript library that we're going to be using to build our user interfaces. And you're probably wondering, why do we want to use React? Well, as we saw when Akshaj was trying very hard to write his Facebook in HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you might run into the issue of you need to write the same thing over and over again. So React allows us to basically reuse what we call components, which will be our building blocks. And it not only is it more efficient in that way, but it's also very fast to code, and it's easy to read, which will help with debugging as well. So these fake HTML tags that we use, don't actually call them HTML tags because they're not. We call them components. And these were examples of our components, right? So we had, for example, our entire Facebook component, which might correspond to the entire application. And then we have, for example, the navbar, the feed, the posts, and the sidebar. And you can do this with pretty much any kind of website. It doesn't have to be just for Facebook, but this is going to be the example that we're using today. So basically, right, so our main component is going to be what we call the app or the application. And it would be basically just everything that we see on our website. And I mentioned that it's going to be, our components are basically our building blocks. So does anyone have any ideas, or can just point out what other components on this web page might be? We actually listed some already earlier. Any ideas? Yeah? Yeah, so our sidebar, right? So our sidebar might be including our friends and our live events. Does anyone else have an idea? Okay, well, here we go, right? So maybe on our most fundamental level, we have our sidebar, as he mentioned, and then we might have our feed, and then we have our navbar. So our just to kind of explain, our navbar it's a feature that you see on a lot of websites, which is basically short for the navigation bar. And what it does is it basically allows you to kind of navigate through the website. So maybe on Facebook, right, you can scroll through your home, and I don't even use this, but I think this is like live streams and marketplace, and I don't know what that is, but basically allows you to navigate the different pages of your website. So now we can break it down even further, right? And this is not working. Within our feed, yo, is this working? Okay, great. Let's do this. Hold on. Okay. So we can break our feed down into components that we call posts, right? And then, oh, it's lagging. Okay, and then we have, within our posts, we have a post body and a comment. So what we can do, right, is we can take components that we see on our webpage and we can break it down even further and further until you get to the very bottom. And what we call this is a component tree. So you can see that this very complicated website that we use can actually be broken down very simply, right? So we have our application, and on it we have a navbar, a feed, and a sidebar. And we're just going to focus specifically on the feed right now. There are a lot of other features you can implement, but just within our feed, right? Then we have posts. And then within our posts, we have a post body, and we have a comment. And I think you can comment on like recursively on a post infinitely many times, but we're not going to focus on that. So basically, just to recap really quick, React is a framework that lets you divide up your website into reusable components. So we're going to get a bit more into that because it might be a bit hard to grasp. But basically, all those posts that you see on Facebook are pretty much the same component, essentially. And each component you can think of as a custom HTML tag that you can use within your code. So you saw earlier that within our feed, right, we can use the same post component over and over again. And this is a lot better than having to manually write the HTML and CSS over and over again. And finally, the best way to think about this when you're designing your application is thinking of it as a tree. So I think we go into a wireframing lecture later, which is basically how you can plan what your website looks like. But as you're coding things up, you might want to think about how your application can be broken down like this.
So you said reusable, but what did you mean by that?
Well, I'll get into it right now. So we have a bunch of comments from my Facebook feed. This one's not from my Facebook feed. But what do these all have in common? How can we generalize this? Well, let's think about what the most important part of a comment is, right? And this would be, for example, the name and maybe the content of what that comment is, maybe how long it's been since it's posted, maybe a profile picture. And that's exactly what it is, right? This is the bare bones of a comment. You can pretty much model every single comment like this, right? And you can think of this as a visualization of our comment component, right? And the best way to describe a component is it's kind of like a skeleton that we're going to be using to render, or basically tell our computer, how do we want this to be rendered, right? So when we have this component, we're basically telling Facebook, well, I want to have a name and in bold, and below it, I want to display the content. And maybe below that, I want to have a like option, a reply option, and then also show the date that this comment was posted. And maybe I also want a rounded rectangular box surrounding the name of the content. So basically, our component then is just a skeleton for this. However, it doesn't actually contain any of the content itself. So how do we get our comments to contain content then? I said earlier that components were going to be reusable. But if we're putting content into it, wouldn't that mean that Facebook would just render the same comment over and over again? Well, to circumvent this, we have this idea called props. And props are inputs that we pass from a parent to a child. So what this will mean is, what this will mean is, let's say our parent is the post, or just worry more about the child right now, right? And maybe what props we're going to pass in are the name, the comment content, and the date posted. And then what we can do then, oh, that's not important right now. Okay, ignore that. But basically, we can pass into this child component this information, and it will allow it to render as an actual comment. So maybe when we have this component, we can specify, okay, when I call this tag, or when I call an instance of the component, I want to say, okay, I want my name to be, I guess, Arya, and the content will be him asking me to be his best man, I guess. And maybe the date posted was 5 years ago. And that's how it's going to render. So just to recap a little bit, the props actually show the information that is displayed, or you pass that information in. And the actual component itself describes how we want to render. Another thing to, I guess, be aware of is that props are immutable. So if you are, I guess, familiar with, or I guess if you've coded before in the past, and you know that, for example, when you have functions, a lot of the times when you call them within your function body or definition, you don't really change the value of your inputs, or at least you shouldn't. And the same thing goes with props. In this case, you can think of it as when you pass in this prop, or in this case, the content of your comment, you wouldn't want this information to change unless you, I guess, edit it. But it would be really bad if you log into Facebook and maybe 1 minute it says one thing and another minute it changes completely. So you don't really want your props to be changing. And so we consider them to be immutable, which means we don't change them. So now we have our reusable comment component. And we pass props in from parent to child. And we also think of our component as a skeleton that renders how our comments will appear with content. So are we done with this? Did we code Facebook? The answer is no, we did not. And there's this issue of, well, we have this like button. So let's look at this post, right? It has 14 likes. It's Nick asking if he can make a railgun in his garage. And how can we code up something like this to keep track of our likes? Can we do this using props? Well, unfortunately, we can't, right? Because we said earlier that props are immutable. But the first thing is we want something like likes to be mutable. We want to be able to see whether or not someone is liking this or not. We wouldn't want our Facebook to say we cap our likes at 0, and this just never changes. Another thing is that we want likes to be private to this specific component, right? We wouldn't like our like count. We wouldn't want our like count to be influenced elsewhere outside of this, I guess, post in this case. So now we're going to introduce this idea called state. So state is private information that is maintained by the specific component in mind. So in this case, let's say within this comment component, we have a state called likes. And likes is going to keep track of, well, how many likes you have. And originally, let's say that this has 0 likes. Sorry, Nick. And then once I like it, the state called likes will go to 1 to indicate that it has now been liked. Yeah, so just a little recap now. So we kind of have something that works, right? So I guess, again, we are passing in the props. That would be the content where we have Nick being the author, and he says, thanks, Andrew. Can you unblock me on Messenger? And then we also have our state, which would be our like button. And one thing to notice is that state can also influence how our, oh, yes, we have, oh, can I get to your question after this? So state can also influence how our app renders. So you notice that when I like the comment, now the like button is blue, and it renders a like button in the bottom right corner. So this is precisely why we use state, which we'll get into a bit more later. You had a question? Oh, yes. So we can get into the, I can give a little bit of a preview for this. So you remember in our component tree, we had, for example, our app, and then our feed, and then our post, and our comment, right? So parent to child is basically indicating that kind of relationship. So we would be passing in information from the post to the child. This might be a bit confusing at first, but the reason why is you can think of each set of comments being linked to a specific post, right? Because you wouldn't want a set of comments to appear for a specific post appearing elsewhere on Facebook, right? So actually, the way you can think about it is for each post that you have on Facebook, it has a set of child comments. And that information about like what content is in this comment is actually information that is within the parent, which is the post, right? Because it has that information. You don't want it to store elsewhere. It needs to be tied to that post. And it passes that information in and allows us to render the comment. Does that kind of make sense? All right. This is also lagging a bit. I'm going to click it here. Oh, OK. Did I skip something? OK, no. So now we're going to get into writing ReactJS components in code. So we're going to go back to trying to write Facebook again. I'll give you a little bit of a demo. So if we click on Facebook, I don't know about you, but this is what my Facebook looked like. It's Claire's profile. So we're going to try coding this. So we see a bunch of posts, right? And some of these posts have comments. So let's code this. So what are some of the components that you might see on this page? Anyone want to give it a guess? Where's Nick? I'm going to call him Nick. Is he here? Yo, Nick, what are some of the components that you see on this page? Comments. Right, low-hanging fruit. Thank you. So he's right. So we have our post, right? We can think of that as one component. And then within that post, we have comments. So we can think of our component tree. This isn't exactly what I showed you before, but mainly focus on the fact that we have a post, and within it, we have 4 comment components that are the children. So, So let's think about some of the states and props that we might want to have, right? So I said earlier that our parent actually has to contain information about what the comment or what the children are, right? So the first So we might think of the state of our post to be containing not only its content, but also maybe we'll have it contain an array of the comments that are underneath it. And then within the comment, maybe the props then are the content, the name, whatnot, and the state would be whether or not we have liked this post. It's still not working. All right, does this kind of make sense? All right, so let's get into it. So this isn't actually going to be a workshop. I'm just going to be walking through kind of a little bit of code to kind of give you an idea of what it's like to code in React. So let's break this down. So the first thing we want to do is we want to import React from React, because that's what we're using. And we have this, I guess on line 3, right? It says constant comment equal. So basically this is declaring a function. So we're going to be writing what we call functional components. So we can run, so basically we think of our components and write our components as functions. And the input that we take are props. And then we can see within our, our function, it has a return statement. And then finally, we're going to export this comment. In JavaScript, in the workshop, you didn't actually have to do this, but you have to do this with React if you want to use this elsewhere. And so we want to try to make this comment render, or not gonna the entire thing, but the bare bones of it. So again, it's a function that takes in props as an input, and the return type is actually, it expects a return type of HTML8 code. I'll show you what that means in a little bit. And what you're returning is basically going to describe how your component is going to appear on the screen. So what might be the first thing that we want to do whenever we have a comment? Well, maybe what we want to do is we want to set the state, right, of how many likes you have. Or let's assume that you're the only user on Facebook and you just like things. So a post is either liked or not liked by you. So let's set the initial state to be false. So we're saying this thing is not liked. And to break down the syntax, so you're declaring the variable, and then within the brackets, is liked is going to be the name of your state variable. And then there's this other thing called set is liked. This is going to be a function that allows you to update the state later. And we're going to tell you, I think in a later lecture, why we have to do it in this notation, rather than just saying, for example, is liked equals true, is liked equals false. But basically, what this says is we have a state variable is liked that's keeping track of whether or not a post has been liked or not. And we're setting it to be a default value of false. This is how Facebook normally renders, right? Because posts don't come liked by default. So then the next part is our return statement. So what do we want to return? Well, let's take a look at this comment, right? So we probably want to return a div. And we're going to style it to be, I don't know, like you have the class name is going to be the comment text. Let's assume you've defined this elsewhere. And this is what I mean by you return HTML-like text. So you can actually write HTML within JavaScript, which might be a bit funny. But yeah, so you're returning this div. And what do you want within your div? Well, I'll go into that later. You want to include this content, right? So you return a div that's styled appropriately and says, wait, OMG, I love this song. And one thing to notice is that when we're using React, we actually use class name to access CSS classes instead of class. So just make sure you do that. You might run into an issue where if you use just class for your CSS, it actually won't render. It's not going to throw an error, but it's also not going to work. So you can use that in case you run into that issue. So what's wrong with this, though? If we use this, this is the only comment that's going to appear on Facebook all over the place. So what we actually want to do is we use props.content. We're assuming, for example, that we pass in within our props a content variable. And that content would then contain this line, oh my gosh, I love this song. And we access the content of this comment by saying props.content. And yeah, it's passed in as a variable up there in the function declaration or definition. So now we can reuse this component over and over again. And we can see that this is essentially a skeleton, right? We're not hard coding anything in here. The content that we have is passed into it. And this allows it to be reusable. Now, a quick thing to notice that you might be confused on is when we use regular parentheses within JavaScript or React, it allows us to write HTML-like code. So we have our return statement that actually allows us to write HTML within our JavaScript. And then you can use curly braces to actually return to a JavaScript environment within your HTML, right? Because within HTML, if you just wrote props.content, that's just going to print on the page. But within our JavaScript, we have HTML. And then within our HTML, we open the curly braces to allow us to enter a JavaScript-like environment, access the variable props.content and get its information. And that's what is displayed on our comment. Does that make sense? So this is your part now.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I know we threw like a lot of information at you guys. So we tried to make this little guide that tried to encompass everything that we are teaching you today. What I'll probably do for the next 40 minutes is try to go through some examples and show you guys on the screen an example mini app or like an example way of coding something in React. So yeah, if you guys could all open up this link and I guess give me a thumbs up when you have done so. Also, feel free to like ask questions at any time in the questions doc. I want to pop that again. There's a link somewhere, weblab.to/questions, because React is a very confusing topic, and it is going to be probably half of our entire course. We'll just be teaching React. This is definitely like only the first lecture. There'll be a lot more React practice. Tomorrow we have a React workshop too, where you'll get to actually code stuff. So yeah, React's really cool. But yeah, okay, so I'll try to walk you guys through coding Facebook again, because I tried it at the beginning and I wasn't so good at it. So I want to redeem myself a little bit and try to do it a better way. So we have Facebook. And so as Alan mentioned, the ideal way to do this is to just have one tag that is just the whole app. And then we're done coding it. We just have one tag. It works. And usually this will be the app tag. It will just look like caret app, or I don't know what that symbol, the symbol less than symbol app, close tag, greater than symbol, whatever. And then the question is, where do we define it? And we define it in a file called app.js. And how we define it is we split it up into a bunch of different sections, which are components. So there's one giant app component. And then we get to divide that up into these separate sections, which are just little boxes on the web page. And then each of those is divided into more sections, et cetera, et cetera. That's the whole point of React, because then the code looks very simple. So what does that look like in code? Alan talked about it a little bit, but I can walk you guys through this little code sample. So at the top, we import React. In JavaScript, you can import things. And then we import the components we're using. So I guess it's not that important, but we just import our navbar, import our intro, import our photos. And then we define the app as just a constant variable, and it's a function. And the function returns HTML-like code where I guess we have a div, and in the div we have the navbar at the top, and then we have more divs, and we have our other components. If we wanted, we could add some styles to the divs. We could add some text. We could like put little things separating them. We could, I guess we have to arrange some of the divs horizontally, some of the divs vertically. So we do all that here using different styles on the divs. But basically, we just return the mini components put in divs or in whatever HTML tags we want. We can put headers, we can put anything. And then at the very bottom, we export this constant, export default app. And that's it. This is all of Facebook, basically. But obviously, the devil's in the details. How are each of these components implemented? That's what matters. So we can dive into one of those. What was that?
You gotta click.
Have to click it? Okay. So, okay, brief interlude. A quick reminder of what props are. Props are inputs. That's what you have to remember, props, inputs. So these components, these little parts, we want them to be customizable. So we want to be able to pass in inputs to them because, for example, you look at the intro component, my city's in there. I'm from Fairfax, Virginia, but not everyone's city is going to be Fairfax, Virginia. People will have different cities they're from. So rather than having different components for every person, we want to just use the same component because it's basically the same thing. So we can just pass in the input. Or like, for example, for the post, we can pass in the name and pass in the text. And those are called props, the inputs. So this is the exact same file as earlier, app.js, except now I'm passing in inputs to each of the components. So as you can see, I'm passing in city and pronunciation to intro, because if you look at intro, I need the city and pronunciation in the component, but I don't have it because, I mean, the intro is just a generic component. So I need to give it the city and the pronunciation. For the photos, since it's different for every person, I would need my links to the photos probably. And the post, each post will be different. So probably I need to give it my name, the user who posted it, and then the body of the post. So we can literally just pass them in as props. It looks like this. This is the syntax. You guys have seen this before in HTML where like you have the, for example, the image tag, you need to put in the source. I guess that could be considered a property, prop-ish type thing in HTML. So it's basically like your own custom HTML tag. That's how I like to think of props and components. So let's look at the intro component. As you can, if you look at the picture, the intro thing is in the green, over there. Let's look at how we implement that. So what we do is we do it in a new file. So we make a new file, Intro.js. And then in that file, we import React again. Then we define intro as a constant, which is just a function again. And it just returns HTML code. And this is just literally plain HTML. Div, a paragraph tag, lives in Fairfax, Virginia. We bolded that. A bunch of buttons. I think I spelled everything correctly. But yeah, that is the intro. But this is not everyone's intro. This is my intro. Like, ideally, we want this to be a generic component, which we can use for everyone, not just me. So what we can do, I'm going to flip back and forth a bit so you can see what I changed. We can pass in props. So this function that components are defined as functions, it can have props as an input. So then as Albert mentioned, that's how you put in inputs in JavaScript functions. But now props is an input, and you can refer to properties of props because props is just a JavaScript object. So it looks like it's an object, and it has the city as a parameter, and has the pronunciation as a parameter because that's how we defined it. Like in app.js, we put in the city, and we put in the pronunciation. So what we can do is just refer to props.city and props.pronunciation. And one thing you might ask me is, wait a sec, that's JavaScript. Props.city, props.pronunciation, those like props is a JavaScript object. That's not HTML. We're in HTML right now. How can we use JavaScript inside of HTML? Well, the answer is those curly braces. Whenever we have this curly braces in HTML, it's our way of creating a JavaScript environment inside of HTML. So when we put those there, everything inside is pure JavaScript. So we can just refer to the props variable, which was in our JavaScript area, and it just works. And yeah, so this is now our introduction or intro component. And if we passed in different things, it's passed in a different city, a different pronunciation, it would just work and display correctly. Any questions on that? Yes?
Why is the first reference to props in parentheses and not curly braces?
That's a great question. It's because in JavaScript, the way that functions are written is that you put in the inputs within parentheses, and then there's an arrow, and then the function body is in curly braces. So the inputs would be in the parentheses, and then the body would be in curly braces, and it would have a return function. So you can think of it as just a regular JavaScript function. It's the same as like the previous workshop of regular JavaScript. Nothing to do with React, it's just a function.
So this whole thing is a function that we turn the HTML block, but the first part of it references props and the parameters for the function. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's just like functions in Python, basically. Just how like, I think they also have parentheses in Python. But any other questions? Everything good so far? Yes, thumbs up, thumbs down. Feel free to stop me at any time to re-explain anything. I know this stuff is confusing, so. I'll move on to the next component. So okay, let's say we go back to our website, and wow, we just put it up 1/4 of Facebook. Very nice, but we got 3 more to go. So let's code up the photos component. So what is this component actually? It's the text photos. I just ignored the see all photos thing. That's not like crucial to Facebook. So there's a header photos, and then there's a bunch of photos. That's all the component is. So if we code it up, we first import Reacts from React. And then we have our function, which is the photos constant. And in that function, you can see the parentheses, empty parentheses, because there are no inputs right now. We define a constant myLinks, which is just an array of my pictures. And then I think Albert mentioned this briefly, the map function in JavaScript is just a little JavaScript quirk where you can take an array and output another array by doing a function to everything in the array. But how this works is I'm just getting an array of image tags. And what it is I take each of the links and I replace it with an image tag where the source is that link. So my image tags is just an array of image tags. And then I return a div with the header. So I'm putting my photos header. And then I'm putting all my image tags. So I'm putting my JavaScript array in these curly braces. And that just works. I have my images. So it would display the H3 header photos, and then displays all the images. Any questions on that, the map function? If not, there's another little quirk in that these are my images. they're not generic. This is not a generic component because I hard-coded my images into it. Like anyone else, you go to their profile, you'll see my 3 images or my 9 images. So we need to make that generic too. So what we do is, let me go back and forth. We just put the props as an input again. So now we can pass in inputs. And rather than having my hard-coded array, we just put the links prop. And that way, when we pass it in, we pass in our array. And then it just gets that array into the JavaScript in props.links. And then now this works the same way. So it takes the array, maps it to a bunch of image tags, and then displays the image tags. And voila, now anyone can have a bunch of images on their profile because they just use this photos component, they put in the links, and they're done. Like, this is just a generic component. This is something that a random person can use now in their HTML. Like, let's say you work in a company, you just made this photos component, and any of your coworkers can now use this component in their code, and it's very nice, very reusable, very good. Perfect. And yeah, so that is my demo of props. So we can move on to the next component. Before I move on, any questions? No? Okay. Yes, I can do that now. Is that better?
Wait, can you like stop sharing and reshare?
Stop sharing and reshare.
Look, it's us. Cool. This one, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, does it work now? Or
We're good? Oh my God.
gotta click it.
Okay, so we did 2 components so far. We did the photos component, the intro component. All they are is we're making our own HTML tags, and we can use them. So now let's do the post one. I want to make a post. I want my post on Facebook. So rather than coding it up through HTML and having to do like 100 different divs for all the 100 posts on Facebook, we're going to just make our own custom tag, Facebook, or our own custom post tag, and be able to reuse it. So let's do that. I'll come back to this, actually. I'll come back to that. So we got this. This is our post. And again, it works the exact same way. We import React. We have post as a constant. And we return HTML code. One thing that Alan mentioned, I'll reiterate, is that you got to use class name instead of class in React. Just a little detail. But other than that, this is pure HTML. Hopefully makes sense. You got your header, aux charge, sign up for Web Lab, and then there's a button, the like button. There's a little like icon, and then it says 250 likes. And then you export the post at the bottom. And then we're going to customize this now. So rather than hard code the post, rather than have every post on Facebook be the exact same, we want to be able to pass in inputs. So we get to specify the name and the text now. And now we display the name in the header. So props.name is the header. And then in the paragraph tag, we put props.text. So now our component is customizable. But still, every post on Facebook is going to have 250 likes now, and you can't click the button. Like, clicking the button does absolutely nothing here. Ideally, we want the number of likes to go up by 1 when you click the button, but we have not done that yet. So let me go back to those other slides. What we ideally want to do is, it'd be nice if we could have this value 350 as part of the component. And when you click it, ideally, this number would go up by 1. And you can actually do that because React is very powerful. Components aren't just things displayed on the page. Well, they are, that's what they are. But they also can have kind of a brain on their own. They can have information which they can update. So what that's called is state. So we have the concept of props. We have another concept called state. So what we're going to do is we're going to store the number of likes as state inside of the component. So we have our component with everything having 250 likes. And how we change this is we're adding these 4 new things to the component. The first thing is we import this useState thing at the top, which lets us use state. And then we set this variable, the number of likes, num likes. And this is a state variable. So rather than a regular variable, we're going to initialize it using this line of code, which is like, it goes like constant, and then we have 2 variables. The actual variable, the number of likes, and then a function that can set the number of likes. So this function, you can call it, and if you do set number of likes of 5, it changes the number of likes to 5. It's basically, it gives you the variable and a setter. And in useState, you pass in the initial value. So that line of code, what it does is it says, give me a variable num likes, initialize it to 0, and give me a function that lets me set the number of likes. And that's very nice because that's exactly what we want to do. We want to be able to set the number of likes when you click the like button. So that's what we do. So we have our button, the like button, and we're adding an onClick parameter. But like a lot of HTML tags will have this parameter onClick, which you can put a function into, and then it just runs the function when you click it. So that's what we're doing here. We have our button, and then in the onClick property, prop-ish thing, we put in our function. You see the little 2 parentheses, arrow, curly braces, set num likes. And we set the number of likes to be 1 more than the current number of likes. So now whenever we click the button, that 250 button, it'll just go up by 1. So we can just keep infinitely loading those. So we can click it, it will go to 251. Well, I'll actually start at 0. So it'll start at 0, because we initialize it to 0. And then when you click it, it goes to 1, and you click it again, it goes to 2. And yeah, so that's our way of setting the state of the component. It's like how the component currently is, like the current, I don't know how, like there's no synonym of state, but it's like private information that can be changed. Like the number of likes we want to change it. There's a better explanation in that guide that I mentioned. I think it's 1.2/React guide 1. But yeah, so this is our post component. Yeah, if you wanted to see it without the boxes. Any questions about state, by the way? Definitely a confusing concept.
Check your audio real quick. You want to hear echo.
Check the audio. Oh, that better now? So yeah, this is very confusing. React is confusing. So for a little recap, we started by explaining functional components, or we started by explaining components. And what they are is, we want to code an app, say Facebook, and we just have the app be one thing, one component, and that one component is made up of a bunch of different components. You guys remember that little box diagram. And that's how you make websites. You just keep on dividing into smaller, smaller parts until the parts become manageable, and then you can code those up. And each component goes in its own file. Each component is a function with the props as the input, and it returns HTML-like code. So it'll be a bunch of HTML tags, maybe some other components, and maybe some JavaScript and curly braces. And yeah, to reiterate that, whenever you do curly braces in the HTML environment in React, you can put JavaScript in it. And then when you write out your components, they look like HTML tags. And to pass in props, you just put a space and then you put in the name of the prop, equals, and then the value of the prop. So like the name of the prop can be anything. You can name it text, you can name it post text. You could have named it the body of the post. And then equals, and then the value. So I love web lab. I guess if it's a string, you should put it in double quotes. If it's just a number, you can put it in curly braces so that you can enter it into the JavaScript environment and then put in a number. To read the prop in JavaScript inside of whichever component you're in, you just do props dot the name of the prop, because props are the JavaScript object. So you're just indexing into the objects. And then if you want to have your own private information inside of the component, like the number of likes or anything else, you can declare state. And the way to do that is this line of code that is constant of the variable and the setter equals React dot, or I guess.
If you imported React.
Yeah, it's either React.useState or just useState. It depends on how you imported it. But then in the parentheses, you put in the initial value of the variable. And also, in your divs, when you want to add styling in React, rather than adding classes, you add class names. So it's class name, not class. And all this information is summarized in this link. So we threw a lot at you. So it would be nice if you guys could take a look at that, and hopefully things will make sense. And finally, React is not just a random framework. It's used by so many different companies. I would say it's probably one of the industry standards for front-end frameworks. Like basically everyone uses it. All these companies are made with React, which is kind of cool to think about, because this is a lot of big companies: Instagram, Facebook, Spotify, Uber, Twitch. You can like look at their code and you can see how they divide up their website into components. if you installed the React Developer Tools extension, you can actually see the React components of websites. And you'll see how they're divided up. And you can see the props. You can see the state. It's kind of cool to see. And tomorrow, we're going to do a little workshop where you guys actually get started coding in React. So if things didn't make sense today, that's okay, because I think once you get your hands into the code, things will make more sense. But yeah, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. I think we're a little early right now, so I guess feel free to leave, but also if you want to stay, we'll be here and we can help with explaining anything React related or setup related or basically anything. Just come down here or raise your hand and
Yeah,
we can help you
also,
explain things.
these slides will be posted later. I know React can be really confusing, so I would highly encourage you to probably go through these slides at least one more time before you try the workshop tomorrow. We'll also be hosting office hours tomorrow, I think some from 7 to 9 p.m. So make sure to come by if you have any questions about React or about the workshop that we end up having. React is going to be really important when you build your entire website. So it's really, really imperative that you understand today and tomorrow.